Welcome to the Dawn to Dusk podcast with your host, Douglas Wood, author of From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. In each episode, Doug speaks with distinguished legal professionals who have mastered the intricacies of building a successful law practice and then transitioning to retirement or other fulfilling pursuits when the right time comes. Now, let's join Doug for today's insightful discussion.
Welcome to Dawn to Dusk. I'm Doug Wood, and today I'm truly honored to welcome Cathy J. Green, one of New Hampshire's most respected and accomplished trial lawyers. Cathy is a graduate of Trinity College and the Franklin Pierce School of Law at the University of New Hampshire. She began her career back in 1977 as a public defender and has spent more than 40 years devoted to criminal defense, both in state and federal courts. After a few years with the Public Defender's Office, she launched a firm where she went on to build an outstanding practice handling everything from high-stakes white-collar investigations to serious felonies and homicide trials. Today, she continues her work as of counsel to Sheehan and Gordon, one of New Hampshire's leading law firms. Over the course of her career, Cathy has been recognized at the very highest levels. She was inducted into the Fellow of American College of Trial Lawyers, an honor reserved for only 1% of the best lawyers in each state, a true honor. She's been listed in Best Lawyers in America for more than 25 years and consistently named super lawyer, and in 2018 was recognized as one of the top 100 lawyers in all of New England. Her contributions go far behind the courtroom, however. She has chaired the board of the New Hampshire Public Defender. She served as a trustee on the University System of New Hampshire and helped shape important statewide initiatives on criminal justice and reform. She's also received one of the profession's most prestigious awards, including the Donald DeFray, I guess it's pronounced, Award for Outstanding Professionalism, the Merrill Richter Achievement Award, and the Champion of Justice Award. On a personal note, I had the privilege of working with Cathy when she served as the vice chair of the Board of Trustees of the Franklin Pierce Law Center, and she and I, together with the then dean, orchestrated the merger of the law school into the University of New Hampshire, a very transformative event for the school, and an event that she and I can remember well, and we won't talk about all those times we had to rush to Durham, New Hampshire to placate some broken egos and that kind of thing. We'll stay away from that, but it was quite the experience, in the spirit from Dawn to Dusk, we're going to talk a little bit about the Dawn, how she began her career, and Dusk, what she's doing now, and how she's building a legacy and passing on her wisdom. Cathy is not just an attorney. She's a mentor, a trailblazer, and a true champion of justice. Cathy, it's a privilege to have you on today.
Hi, Doug. It's really nice to see you.
Sorry for that broken up introduction, but yeah, there you go. Anyway, we're just going to have a conversation. That's what this podcast is all about. I know you've seen some of the other ones, so you sort of know the format. But in the beginning, I'd just like to, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from and why you chose Trinity College in Connecticut to go to, and a little bit about you.
I grew up in Scarsdale, New York, suburb of New York City, and decided to go to Trinity because in the kind of trailblazing fashion, there had been no women at Trinity, and Trinity had just expanded its classes to include women. So I was actually in the second class of women at Trinity College and saw that kind of as a challenge. It was far enough from home that my parents couldn't just show up, but I could also get home. Back in those days, we used to hitchhike between our homes and colleges. But Trinity was a great place for me. I was able to craft a degree that got me through basically in 2.5 years. So I went right from college to law school without taking a breath.
So you did a 4-year curriculum in 2.5 years.
Yeah, I had gotten a bunch of AP credits. They gave me full credit for a semester that I took off to work for George McGovern, working in the New Hampshire primary. I took a summer school session at UNH, which actually was my first exposure to UNH, which I later became very involved with, serving on the Board of Trustees, which is my terms have just finished on that.
Oh, okay. Okay. I have to smile a little bit because my daughter graduated early from the University of Miami, did it in 3.5 years. And she said to me, do I get the money for the last semester that you didn't have to pay for? I said, no, it doesn't work that way. But anyway, so then you went right off to law school. Why did you want to be a lawyer for a long time, or how did that all come about?
Yeah, I grew up in a family that had been scarred by McCarthyism. The only other lawyer in my family was Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was my mother's first cousin. His involvement with Joe McCarthy had included reporting my father to the House Un-American Activities Committee. It was very activating for me to want to add to the family lore the fact that lawyers could do good and not just do bad. So he was a very motivating force. But I also grew up in an area of Vietnam protests and watching the Chicago 7 trial. So I, from high school on, was very interested in being involved in the legal system and fighting injustice
So
as I saw
you were politically active or aware at a very young age. Right,
I
right.
was, yeah. I mean, my first involvement with law enforcement was getting pulled into the police station in Scarsdale for picketing, boycotting grapes, and getting into a skirmish with the grocer at our local grocery store.
Oh, wow. I didn't know who they were dealing with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I gather that's sort of the transition in why you chose criminal law. It was part of your concerns about the of justice and equal justice and the like. So you
I
chose
always
criminal law.
wanted to be a criminal lawyer and was fortunate enough at law school to connect with a person who became my mentor, Jim Duggan, who was a public defender at the time. And through law school, I worked as his investigator, and that solidified my interest in being a public defender. And at that time, public defenders were only in 2 counties in New Hampshire. There were 3 public defenders when I joined the program. I chaired the board for years, and there are now about 140 public defenders throughout the state of New Hampshire.
That's a testament to your organizational talents, to put it mildly. And Duggan, by the way, as you know, I mean, for the viewers and listeners, he went on to become a justice of the New Hampshire Supreme Court. So he was quite the mentor to have in those days. I knew him well as a great professor, in addition to being one of the great clinicians in terms of the law school's very fine programs and doing that kind of stuff. So,
Absolutely.
so we talked a little earlier today, and you reminded me or told me that you were the first female public defender in New Hampshire, and you were the first practicing criminal lawyer, woman lawyer in New Hampshire. Tell us how you went through that challenge, because it had to be, having lived in New Hampshire in those days, along the time that you did, it was not exactly the most liberal state in America. It was a wee bit conservative with Meldrum Thompson and Loeb and the Loeb who ran the Manchester Union Leader. So you must have been facing a lot of challenges. How do you deal with that?
It was a really fun time. So when I started, there were no other women that were litigating in court. There was a woman that was doing divorce law and a woman that was doing real estate law, and they would on occasion come to court, but they never did litigation trials and such. When I started, the lawyers and judges referred to each other as the lawyers were referred to as brother so and so. So Brother Wood. And the judges didn't know what to address me as. So some of them called me Brother Green, others called me Sister Green. My first jury trial, actually, there were 3 co-defendants. Jim Duggan, who was in private practice at that time, represented one. There was a third one, and my client, they were charged with gun running and receiving stolen property. And we really had no defense. At one point, Jim Duggan said to me, our defense is we're going to sit as far away from our clients as possible so the jury somehow will forget about them. But case went in, and the judge referred to me throughout the trial as Sister Green. And jury deliberated, they came back, and the foreperson stood up and announced not guilty. And Duggan turned to me loud enough for everybody in the courtroom to hear and said, "No shit." And that was it. And about 3 weeks later, I was in a local restaurant, and this person who looked really familiar to me came up and she said, Are you Cathy Green? And I said, yes. And she said, I was on your jury and I recognized her. And she said, is it true you're a nun? And I said, what? And she said, well, we all agreed that a nun would never represent a guilty client.
That's
And
hilarious. I'd
so
never heard
that
that
was the
story.
yeah, so that
That's
was my
terrific.
first jury trial. But it was so unusual for a woman to be in court that all the male lawyers that are hanging out in the courthouse would come into the courtroom just to see me perform.
Hmm.
So it really was a novelty, but it was a huge opportunity for me too, because while I had to prove myself, it also was really easy to have people get interested, listen to me. I had great relationships with all the people at the courthouse and the jail and the prisons. And so while um, it was unusual for a woman, it soon became routine. And I realized that we had fully made the transition about 15 years later when I was sitting in court picking a jury, and I realized that the judge, the clerk, the defense lawyer, the prosecutor, we were all women. So now it's at least 50% women that staff the public defender's office and the prosecutor's office. And, in my career, I've just seen that tremendous change.
I talk a lot about in this podcast about legacy and what legacy you hope to leave. Clearly, you've left a legacy on that count alone of being the trailblazer, the first one on the scene, and now seeing a 50-50 split more or less in the bar. And that's just, it's a few years, but that kind of progress in that time frame has to give you a really truly a sense of pride and
Yeah.
accomplishment. That's just an
Well,
incredible story.
yeah. I mean, it's been really exciting to see.
So you start off and you're in private practice, you're a criminal defense lawyer, and you deal with interesting clients, let me put it that way, people
Fascinating
with
clients.
issues, with sort of conflicts, if we want to call them. And you're a woman in this sea of men who are whether you want to do the stereotype or whatever, they're the ones who are going to defend. They're the macho guys, everything else. And here's this lady who's going to defend me, and I've been charged with a serious criminal offense. How did you market yourself in that context? Did you get referrals? Did you go out? How did you become who you became with the top criminal lawyer in New Hampshire?
Yeah, well, New Hampshire's a pretty small bar, particularly at that time. And so, I got to know all the people involved in the system. My practice was mainly based upon, at least at the beginning, upon referrals. People would send me cases. And I started out not just doing criminal defense, but doing a general practice. After I left the public defender's office after 4 years, I did personal injury, I did marital law, and I hated it. I remember I was on the phone one Thanksgiving Eve with a client who I was representing in a divorce case, and she was complaining about her husband, from whom she was separated, being late dropping the kids off, and she was whining about it. And I looked at the phone and I yelled in the phone, "You married the asshole!" And I realized I needed to go back to what I loved to do. So from that point on, I made the determination that I was just going to do criminal defense. I did, but it was not hard to build a practice at that time because I was very visible. I did a lot of media. I became our local TV's kind of go-to person for being interviewed and commenting on cases. I did quite a number of high-profile murder trials, which were covered live, the first ones to be covered live in our state. So it's a small market, and it was pretty easy for a person who was unusual to get attention and clients.
So they were covered live in the courtroom, on
Mhm.
live TV, watching you try the case.
Right.
Oh, wow. Wow, that had to be quite the event. So, was there any particular moment where you woke up one day and said, "Look, I've really made it," because you had a high profile case? Or was there a moment where you decided, "Yes, I've been successful. I've accomplished my goal"?
I think that the times that I realized that my kids, I have two daughters who now obviously are grown, but as they were going through school, um, a large part of my practice became representing their friends or or their friends' parents.
Hmm.
And so they started to realize that, that I was really well known. And I think that through their friends and their friends' parents, I came to realize that my reputation was pretty good.
Wow. Wow, that's fantastic. Fantastic. So you never really had a large firm until now. You're of counsel to a relatively larger firm, but you had associates, you had people who worked with you over the years. What were your techniques to motivate them, to mentor them, to let them into the game, or whatever you want to call it?
Criminal law is just fascinating. So you're dealing with really people who are facing the most stress of their entire lives, who have made mistakes many times, and really rely on you for your judgment and guidance. So there's a lot of stress, but the work is also fascinating. But it's so stressful that my view has always been that you have to have a good time doing it. And the way you have a good time doing it is to collaborate, to be able to talk about cases, to be able to laugh about your situation. Because trial work, as you probably know, can be really stressful. So, it's not just doing the case, but it's also getting to know each other. It's nurturing each other, and it's making sure that people understand that they need to have a life beyond the office. And that's always been really important to me. I was very involved in my kids' upbringing. I was very committed to trying to make all of their games and events, and I really encouraged other people to do that. I, from a very early point in my career, was committed to taking vacations and, would schedule them, put them on the calendar so I could really schedule around them and give myself the opportunity to travel with my husband and my kids. And that was very important to me and to my sanity and enjoyment of life. When I came back from a 3-week vacation, I felt completely renewed and ready to get back to work.
There's a couple of things you said there that I think are worth highlighting. One is the commitment to your kids and being at the events that your kids are, the games, the plays, whatever it might be. I had a client who once said to me something very profound, and he said that it isn't the events you went to that they remember, it's the events that you didn't go to that they
Mhm.
remember. And it was, and it really hit me. And I said, I've got to up my game and do the same kind of thing that you did. So I would end up taking the red eye from California to show up in the coach the baseball game, and the limo would drive up to the field with me in it. I'd get out and I'd coach the game. It was crazy. It was insane. But you're right. That's
That's great.
part of how you keep your balance. And so many lawyers kind of lose their ability to keep that balance because they can get sucked into the life of their clients and just the pressures of being a lawyer. You talked about trial work being so pressurized and intense. And I started out as a trial lawyer, as a litigator, and I had some of that kind of phone call with the divorcee that you had. I don't remember exactly when it was during this process of being a litigator that I just woke up and I said, I can't do this. This is just not my gig. It's just different. So I shifted over and became a transactional lawyer. But one of the things I always marveled about litigators, and yourself included, and I looked at some of the things you've been doing and some of the lectures you do on a long, long list of all sorts of concepts, complex scientific concepts, is a litigator's ability to absorb a subject matter and become an expert in it, and then regurgitate it in a courtroom, and then forget it until the next time they have to do it. So they have this incredible ability to absorb really complex information and bring it down to a level that an individual and a jury can understand. And I know you do that. You do that extremely well. So I'm curious though, and further to your comment about life's balance and vacations and kids and stuff, you've also done an awful lot in giving back to the legal community in New Hampshire. When you and I served on the Board of Trustees at the Franklin Pierce Law Center at the time, now the
Right.
Franklin Pierce School of Law, and we went through the process of merging with UNH. You, John Hudson, and I spent enormous number of hours, uncompensated hours, not that they had to be compensated, but they were uncompensated hours that interfered with our day-to-day practices. And we were both busy, very busy lawyers at the time. Yeah, you committed to all of that. And we spent many hours together, and as I joked earlier about going up and calming the nerves of UNH on occasion. What is your philosophy there? I mean, it would have been just as easy for you to be a very successful criminal lawyer if you hadn't done any of that. So why'd you do it?
Um, so that's a really interesting question. I didn't do it for the reason of marketing and business, but it proved hugely beneficial to my practice. But when I left the public defender's office, one of the things that I really missed was the camaraderie, the getting together and talking about cases and issues. And so I had the idea very early on to form an association of criminal defense lawyers in New Hampshire because there wasn't anything like that. And so that was kind of the first endeavor that I tried. It became hugely successful. I served as its president for years and years. And now it's like has like 300 members and it has a listserv that, has 20 posts a day. I mean, it's really the place that New Hampshire criminal defense lawyers congregate and relate to each other on. So I got involved in that, and then I just had such a good time that I said yes to everything. I was very involved in the Bar Association, in committees. I became involved with legislative committees. I was on the Public Defender Board for 40 years. I was involved with the law school after my tenure as when you left the law school board, I became chair of the law school board for a number of years. I then was elected to the university system board and have just finished 8 years on that and have termed out. So I've always been very involved in organizations and excuse me, public service, all of it related in some way to the practice of law and to improving the criminal justice system.
Well, you mentioned one thing there that I find interesting. You organized a group of your competitors effectively. Well, you said we may be competitors. We're all competing for assignments from the clientele out there, but you brought them all together to have camaraderie and discussions and the like. As you know as well as anybody, the legal profession from a competitive standpoint can be very cutthroat, to put it mildly, in terms of some folks, going after clients and doing everything else. And the idea of gathering all of them together to sort of share thoughts, et cetera, is unique. I'm not comparing myself at all with you, but early on in my career, I was an advertising and marketing lawyer, as you know, and one of my clients called me and said, "Do you know a lawyer in Singapore that does advertising law?" And I said, "Well, no, but I would think you do. You have hundreds of people on your staff, on your legal staff." He goes, "No, I don't know one. So find one." So I found one, and I had the idea that, well, what if I made a global organization out of this, of advertising lawyers all around the world? And I would do, I think, the opposite of what you did. I didn't do it because I was doing a public service, that's for sure. But I was curious to learn on in whatever it was, and the ancillary effect of that is the fact that it's one fun, but more importantly, it just heightens your game because you learn so many insights from others who have seen a problem differently. You can
Absolutely.
you can learn so much by just being open and honest with your competition and not being fearful of your competition. Because in the end, the old adage, the water rises, the whole boat rises kind of thing. So it can be a beneficial all around. But you don't find many lawyers like you who were able to do that, particularly at the time when, again, I keep getting back in my thinking that all of a sudden this woman out of nowhere, who's the first woman in the criminal bar in New Hampshire, decides, hey, let's all get together and try to, form an organization. I can imagine some of the reactions you must have witnessed to that endeavor by you early in your career. So, uh, you've now shifted to of counsel at the firm. How has that changed your life? Was that part of the plan? I mean, what's next for you?
Yeah, so a bunch of questions in that. It wasn't part of my plan. My plan, I had a small firm. And my plan was to gradually step away from that small firm and have my partner kind of take over and take over my role. But he decided to retire before I did. So right before the pandemic, he decided that he wanted to go into the maple syrup business with his son. So that caused me to kind of evaluate where I was. Did I really want to bring a new partner in? Did I want to keep the business going? And I made the decision that I really didn't want to do that business part of it, and it was time for me to look for a new situation. And there was a firm with partners that I really did a lot of criminal cases with. Steve Gordon was a major player in the firm that I went to, and he's a great lawyer. So I decided to become of counsel to his firm. And at the time, there were only a couple criminal defense lawyers in the firm. And I joined right before the pandemic. We had a couple cases that we did, big litigation, really fun cases that we all did together in that division of the criminal lawyers in the firm. And then the pandemic hit. So that kind of changed the dynamic of the firm, and the camaraderie that I so enjoyed in working on cases was gone because everybody was looking at screens and
Right,
doing.
right. Exactly.
So I transitioned. I did a lot of work for the university system during COVID. I served on a number of committees trying to figure out how to reopen the university with COVID.
Mhm.
And my work for the university turned to probably 20 hours a week. And so that was a big commitment, but perfect during the time of COVID. And I also became very involved in COVID management at the prisons and jails because our state was not doing it well, and prisoners were getting really, really sick because of poor management. And so I became very involved in that. And so there were new avenues that I found to try to be constructive during that period of time. And then after the first couple of years of COVID, at that point, our firm criminal division had expanded. A lot of new young lawyers came in, and I stepped more into a mentoring role. And I had been practicing almost 50 years. Didn't really think that I wanted to retire, but I started doing a lot more traveling. I started gardening. I now have 5 grandkids that I absolutely adore being with. And so my time got filled kind of not purposefully, but inevitably by those other things. And so about 6 months ago, I started as a counsel, but I've become mostly retired, still doing consulting and still people that come to me, kind of helping them find the right lawyer and right situation to protect themselves. But I am looking forward to doing a lot more traveling and a lot more grandparenting.
Have you ever considered writing your memoir that tells the
I haven't.
world and
I've read
memorializes
your
your?
books. No, I've read your books, Doug, and I think, well, maybe that's something that I would do at some
I mean,
point.
I had great stories, but you have even. I know some of your stories that we're not going
Yeah.
to talk about on the podcast, but you've had some, I mean, unbelievable, great stories to tell. And I always encourage folks to not think about the ego aspect of writing your memoirs. That's obviously a function of it, but more so to for your grandchildren
Hmm.
and for your kids, so that when they're older, they can look back and say, that's what grandma did. You know,
That's an interesting
that,
idea. Maybe in the depths of February,
yeah, there
when
you go. Yeah, exactly,
when
exactly,
I'm
exactly.
bored, I'll say, "Oh, Doug made that suggestion. I think that's a great
Yeah, next
suggestion."
time you're with your grandchildren, they go, "What do you do, Grandma?" You
Yeah.
can, you can think about doing that. One last question before I let you go. You sort of piqued my curiosity on the whole COVID thing, and I asked many lawyers about this. I mean, what do you think the profession needs to do, if anything, to fix the problem that COVID created, where the camaraderie and the stewardship and the mentoring sort of got the rail? And even to this day, most law firms don't have people in 5 days a week. And worse, I've seen in firms I consult with now that the culprits in that aren't very often the young attorneys, but in fact the senior attorneys who don't want to come in anymore, want to take
Yeah.
advantage of being, able to stay at home 3 days a week, whatever it is. And it's losing a fabric that you and I grew up with in this profession that meant so much to us becoming good lawyers. So, I mean, I'm just curious, what is your view on that?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that the lawyers that are working from home or on Zoom are missing the best part of the practice. Not just in terms of enjoyment and being able to build relationships, but in learning. The way that I learned how to try a case was sitting, watching other people talking, strategizing. And just telling war stories, telling, people about other cases. I think that the cure for that is not what particularly young lawyers want to hear, which is I think you have to require that people go to work and work from an office. And, while you may have some flexibility, and, I think it's great that we have more flexibility in terms of doing depositions by Zoom or doing routine hearings that really don't require a 2-hour drive by Zoom. I think there's so much that is lost by people not being together, particularly in the first 10 years of your practice. I think that it's going to lead to a real problem with people not enjoying their careers. And I have to say, I loved my career. I always enjoyed it. People thought I was nuts when I would tell them how much I would enjoy representing, people who are charged with horrible crimes. Because I did everything from, really bad murder cases to white collar federal court trials. And so I really fear for our profession unless people get back together. As a public defender, when we were on the board, we really struggled with lawyers that they really did not want to come back to work. They'd go to court, but then they wanted to do the rest of their practice and their day by phone.
Mm.
And you just miss so much. And in terms of clients, not being able to sit across a table from a client and really talk to them and interact with them and instead do Zoom meetings, there is so much that is lost. So I think it's a really important point, Doug.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, and I just don't know when the solution is going to come about. And there'll be a whole generation of lawyers that in 20 years from now are going to be the leaders of the industry who never had that base of understanding and camaraderie and education, whatever you want to call it. I don't know whether that's good or bad, or maybe AI will replace it all by then anyway. Who knows? But
Right.
I think it's been a terrible loss for the industry. And I kind of question law firm leadership that has been so tepid in demanding that they everybody come back. You see in some of the financial institutions like Goldman Sachs and others, they just said, you're coming back. It's over, you're coming back. And they're a client-centric company as well. They've got just like we have our clients and they recognize that. But for some reason, law firms have not really sort of gotten back into the swing of things. It's a direction they're going, but they better do it a lot faster than they're doing it. But whatever, that's so much for my editorial comment.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, look, Cathy, thank you so much for doing the program with us. I think that you were inspiring, to put it mildly. I learned some stuff about you I didn't know, which was really incredible.
Mhm.
And I really enjoyed having you on. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you, Doug. It was really fun.
Thank you for joining us on the Dawn to Dusk podcast. You can learn more on building and transitioning a multi-million-dollar law practice in Doug's book, From Dawn to Dusk, How to Build a Multi-Million-Dollar Law Practice and Then Give It Away. If you're interested in working with Doug, suggesting future guests, or have questions you'd like Doug to ask guests in upcoming episodes, reach out to him at douglas.wood@wood.law or visit his website at dawntodusk.wood.law. And if you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share it with your peers. Until next time, we appreciate your viewership.